I don't actually think Gunko is Imu, not literally. I think what we're dealing with here are multiple personas, where there are three characters in control of this body: Gunko, Imu, and the mysterious person who in the past knew Brook. The reason I say this is because of Imu's own words in the original Japanese text. He says, "Nani o gusugusu shiteru," which I would translate as, "What are you messing around for?" He then follows this up with, "Kakujitsu ni senryoku o you suru no da," which means something like, "This certainly requires more military power." The important part in the second sentence is the last bit, "noda," which in Japanese essentially means that you are giving a reason for doing something. In other words, Imu in this scene observed the God's Knight's situation and decided that they needed help. This and his other words to me heavily indicate that Imu has not been actively controlling Gunko or following the God's Knight situation until this point. Imu speaks in a way where it is as if he has only now noticed what is going on, where he's surprised the God's Knights are taking so long and decides that they don't have enough military power. This second sentence in particular would be a very odd thing for Imu to say if he had been in full control of Gunko before this moment. The only real threat the God's Knights had faced on Elbaf before this scene was Gaban, and Gunko had personally just taken care of him right before she was taken over by Imu. I think what is basically going on here is that for most of the Elbaf arc, Gunko has just been Gunko, where she has actually not been actively controlled by Imu, but has instead been her own character. Imu could have still been occasionally tuning in to observe the mission through Gunko, but based on this chapter, Gunko was probably still in control of her body and actions in basically all of her previous scenes. Qilingam also seems to confirm that this is the first time Imu has taken over Gunko's body during this mission, where even though he's on the other side of the island, he immediately senses Imu's presence and is shocked by it. I think Qilingam's reaction means that he sensed Imu's haki, which in itself would mean that Imu and Gunko's haki are different, indicating that they are in fact two separate characters. It is however also clear that Gunko and the person who knew Brook are also two different people. Gunko in a previous chapter knew very well who Brook was, and that he was the Soul King, yet the person who briefly took over the body in this chapter acted like this was the first time she'd seen Brook in a while. Even though there being three separate people in control of this one body may sound super weird, a lot of you probably know that this isn't a new thing in One Piece. We most notably saw this with Cavendish when his body was overtaken by Hakuba whenever he fell asleep. This is also a very compelling theory on what is actually off with Blackbeard's abnormal body, where Luffy and Zoro hinted all the way back in his introduction in Jaya that Blackbeard may be multiple different people. But there is actually a third character in One Piece, who I think might be the most similar to Gunko when it comes to having multiple personalities in the same body. The weird thing about Gunko is that even if she isn't literally Imu, the two are incredibly similar in terms of their personalities. I made a whole 20-minute video that you can watch by clicking here, breaking down all the ways in which Imu and Gunko act and think in the same way, to the point where it was eerie enough for me to theorize that Imu could literally be Gunko in disguise. This chapter, however, made me think that there is another better explanation for this, and why Imu and Gunko are so similar, despite being two different characters. The answer surprisingly might come from Big Mom. I don't want to go into heavy detail here, but since her backstory was first shown, I personally believe that Big Mom is also a character with multiple personas. There is her original personality of Lin Lin, where I think this was the whole point of the Olin storyline, where we saw that this personality is still dormant within her body. Then there is the dominant persona of Big Mom, which I think is a fusion of Lin Lin and Mother Caramel's personalities. There are simply a ton of inexplicable similarities between Mother Caramel and the Big Mom we've seen in the current story, and this is something that goes right down to their facial expressions. I personally think Caramel didn't just die when Lin Lin accidentally devoured her, but that her soul, with the use of her devil fruit, somehow inhabited Lin Lin's body. Real Voldemort type shenanigans going on here. I think this could genuinely also be what is going on with Gunko. The original person who years ago knew Brook could have somehow been taken over by Imu, which could have led to the creation of the Gunko persona, based on both her and Imu's personalities. It's actually incredibly similar to Big Mom in many ways, where just like her, Gunko is seemingly a mix of two different people. Even as an adult, Big Mom still has Lin's dream of creating a utopia where all the people of the world can live happily, but she's at the same time still incredibly malicious and self-serving, just like Mother Caramel. Gunko also exhibits many of Imu's traits, like treating everyone as being beneath her, or lashing out at others in violence, but at the same time, she still enjoys Brook's music and feels hurt by his words, hinting that the original person she was is still a part of the Gunko personality. I think a really interesting question is, if Imu taking over another character's body like this is something he can only do to Gunko, or possibly to other characters as well. We know that Imu has the same telepathic ability as the 5 elders, but this ability is clearly much inferior, as it only allows you to talk to other telepaths, where the elders still had to rely on Saturn's words to know what was going on Egghead. The Egghead arc as a whole seems to lean to Imu not being able to take over the elders, as he never did it during the arc, despite how high the stakes were. Though really, if you ask me, I'm not sure why Saturn didn't also summon Gunko to the island along with the rest of the elders, since we now know that she can both traverse the abyss and be taken over by Imu. This chapter also point blank confirmed that not just the elders, but the God's Knights are also aware of Imu's existence. Considering just how paranoid Imu is, I wonder if he has the same kill switch on the Knights as he did on Saturn. Though I suppose that could be an ability that only works if Imu has also given you an extended lifespan. The list of characters who know about Imu is getting bigger and bigger, but this list is now also very soon going to include the Straw Hats themselves. Personally, I wouldn't be surprised if we even finally get Imu's face reveal during this summer, since Imu already has the longest run of any character of getting actual scenes despite still being silhouetted. Even though the biggest moment in chapter 1149 was the Imu moment, this was however clearly otherwise a Gaban chapter. Gaban, Ripley and Colon are basically revealed to be one of the most healthy families in the whole story, where they all genuinely love each other without pretense. Really speaks a lot about Gaban as a man, that he was able to start a good family in his 50s, in a foreign land with a woman from a different race. This was definitely a really impactful way to reveal Gaban having future sight, and I'm really glad the story waited until this point rather than showing it immediately in the Luffy fight. This is also a running theme with future sight, where characters frequently use it to protect people they're close to, the only exception being Kaido, who only bothered to use it after getting hammered. It's also cool that Summers did put up some fight against Gaban, rather than just falling over, where he even managed to block some of the attacks from him, while also keeping Robin in check. Summers also for the first time used hardening in this chapter, so it turns out he is not just an Imu choked up devil fruit master, but is just an all-round versatile fighter. In my last chapter breakdown, I said that the God's Knights would probably be around the middling Straw Hats without their regeneration, and I still think that's accurate, but I don't think there's any shame in it. The way I see it, guys like Jinbei and Frankie are real strong, even if they aren't Monster Trio strong. Granted, Gunko could however be considerably stronger than Summers and most of the Knights, even without her body being controlled by Imu. Not only is she still keeping Jinbei bound with her powers, unlike Summers, she is also completely fearless in the face of Gaban. Granted, this could be due to her just being more level-headed, as she immediately went for threatening Colon. This was a Kainu level mental warfare, where she just bounced on Colon literally one panel after he'd revealed that he's Gaban's son. And even though Gaban did get beat and blasted to the underworld, I'm very confident that just like Ronya, he's going to be rescued by the Monster Trio. Before I talk about them and my prediction for the next chapter, I should however probably talk about Gaban actually being able to combat the God's Knight's regeneration. I did say in my previous chapter that it was Gaban using Conqueror's Haki. I think that is still what he's doing, where these are some of the most thick black lightning effects we've seen in a while. But I do now think there also has to be some special technique he's using. This chapter gave us 2 panels where Chopper tried to figure out what Gaban was doing, which I'd assume is clear setup for a future revelation. I really like Mr. Morge's idea that it's permanent Haki infusion, and I think that would be a really cool technique to add to Haki combat. My only problem with the theory is that Summers and Qilingam were both afraid of fighting Luffy, which to me would be odd if Luffy had no actual way to damage them. But really, Morge's theory is super cool and you should check it out. Way better than anything I can come up with to explain this. It is pretty noteworthy that Summers is still alive after getting literally cut in half, It seems to follow what happened in the last chapter, where Summers barely noticed his arm getting chopped off. So, in a way, whatever Gaban is doing isn't mortal damage, but he's simply stopping the regeneration from happening. It honestly kind of looks like what the Ope Ope no Mi does, but the difference is that Summers is actually hurt after being cut. I'm fairly certain that what will happen next on Elbaf is that the monster trio will finally get to this branch, since they did literally hear Summers' broadcast before. In other words, we could very soon see Luffy finally face off against Imu. This should be a huge moment in the series, with Luffy finally meeting the leader of the world government. But way more importantly, Imu now literally thinks that Luffy is Joy Boy, so this should definitely be Imu's biggest moment in the story so far. I really don't know what previous scene would even compare to Luffy finally facing Imu, or maybe the closest moment I can think of is Luffy finally meeting Kaido in Wano, but even that would be peanuts compared to this. I'm pretty sure that there is actually going to be a big fight coming up, and that Chopper will tell Luffy and company what Gaban was able to do, so a big part of this fight could be Luffy personally figuring out how to fight against regeneration. However, I still do not think this would be Elbaf's actual climax. We've still got huge hanging plotlines in this arc like the mystery of what happened with Harald, or an entire third of Elbaf that hasn't been explored yet. I also still think the story is setting up way too many outs for the government characters to simply retreat from the island. Where even here, Imu makes it clear that his number one priority is the Holy Land being attacked. I suppose I should briefly touch on this too, where I made a whole video about Dragon being the one who has now invaded Mariejois. What I didn't however mention in that video is that there genuinely are not that many other options for who else could have attacked. This is because of one simple word: geography. In the Egghead arc, we actually learned that the revolutionary army in the Kamabaka kingdom was in fact extremely close to the Holy Land. This was because Kuma was able to fly from Kamabaka to the Red Line in what at most was a few hours. Meanwhile, it took Kuma an entire day to fly from the Red Line to Egghead. Since Pirate Island and Elbaf are incredibly close to each other, and it has only been one day in the timeline since the events of the Egghead arc, this would mean that very simply, not enough time has passed for either Blackbeard or Shanks to sail to the Holy Land. However, because Kamabaka is confirmed to be so close to Mariejois, it genuinely would make sense that it would have taken the revolutionaries just a day to invade. As for any other possible attackers, I think it is honestly slim pickings. I like the idea of Akainu rebelling against the government, but I still think he's for now loyal based on his words at the end of Egghead. The attacker could in theory be the Cross Guild, but the last we heard of their plans, they were going for the One Piece. And even if the government somehow is in possession of the last road Poneglyph, and the Cross Guild somehow knew this, I really don't know why they'd start from the hardest stone, when they could go for places like Wano or Whole Cake. Another idea is that it could be Marco, if the government is for whatever reason holding Weevil in the Holy Land. But maybe this is just me, but Imu seems way more concerned about this attack than the previous ones, so I think whoever the attacker is has to be really strong, way stronger than anyone who's ever attacked the Holy Land before. The fact that Shamrock was called back to Mariejois seems to back this up, where it might have been specifically to combat this new threat. I suppose one wild card idea is that it is simply another strong marine other than Akainu, where maybe Vegapunk's broadcast for example made Fujitora finally reach his limit with the Celestial Dragons. However, absolutely none of these options have the same build-up means and motive that Dragon does, at least in my eyes. Well, actually, there could be one. I'll give credit to this idea for one of my subscribers by the name of Jacob D. Uzumaki, who said that maybe it is Shanks going for the last Poneglyph. It may sound odd that I'm bringing up Shanks again, since I started this segment by saying that it simply would take way longer than a day for him to sail to the Holy Land. But let me explain why this might make sense. Shanks may not have had to sail. There is a huge mystery around Shanks, where he was somehow able to make it from the New World to Marineford in less than a day to stop the Summit War. This is not only an in-story mystery the characters themselves are wondering about, but also something Oda has conveniently refused to answer when asked by fans. I actually did a video that Shanks could possibly use the magic circle like the Elders and the Gods' Knights, And that could actually very well be what happened here. We know that for the magic circle to work through long distances, you needed to already be in place at the location. Shanks having previously placed a marker in the Holy Land could literally be something already set up by the story, where Shamrock specifically mentioned that Shanks at some point in the past had returned to the Holy Land. So really, if Shanks were in fact to have the mark of the Abyss, all the setup would already be there for him to teleport to the Holy Land in an instant. I think the plot twist of Shanks attacking the Holy Land could actually make a ton of sense for the story. The final saga has spent considerable time setting up the fact that Shanks is finally making his big move. It has also been teased for a while that Loki's information about where Shanks is currently going is really important, and something the manga for whatever reason refuses to answer. And really, Shanks' connection with the Celestial Dragons has already been a huge aspect of the final saga with the reveal of the Figarland family. This could all well have been very sly setup for Shanks to personally take the fight to the world government as his opening gambit in the final war. I don't actually have a particular idea on what exactly Shanks would be after in Mariejois. I'm not honestly that keen on the theory that the government has the last road Poneglyph. It is possible, but at the very least, I doubt the story would just invent a highly specific rumor of the black ship surrounded by whirlpools, only to reveal that the stone is just in the Holy Land. Usually, One Piece mysteries have better payoffs, and don't just end up being 100% false. There are however other things Shanks could be after, as there are several other extremely mysterious treasures in the world of One Piece that could be found in Mariejois, other than the last road Poneglyph. One is the literal national treasure of the Holy Land, which we still know next to nothing about. It is also not impossible that the world government to this day is still in possession of Rocksteady Zebek's mysterious treasure that was mentioned back in Kuma's flashback. And really, the big implication with the cold storage that was shown in Imu's first scene could have been that there are many more artifacts of the ancient world hidden beneath Mariejois other than just Joy Boy's hat. Sorry if this went for a bit of a tangent. All I'm trying to say is that I actually really like the idea of Shanks being behind this attack, even though I still think it was more likely to be Dragon. If this is truly going to be another huge war that is going to take place in the Holy Land, I am however not confident it will involve the Straw Hats. One problem is simple logistics, where I'm not sure how they could get there in time for the battle. Theoretically, Kuma could get them to the Red Line with his Devil Foot, but as I brought up earlier, that would take an entire day, and according to Imu, the action is happening right at this moment. I also do not think the Abyss is an option either, where even if Gunko, for example, became the Straw Hat's ally, it was already established that you need the mark to travel the Abyss, and the mark seemingly cannot be granted to just anybody. I also think the Straw Hats don't even have a good motive to go, even if it's Shanks or the revolutionaries attacking. Luffy has agreed with Zoro that he'll only go help his friends if they are in mortal peril. Luffy also has huge trust in Sabo, as he was only concerned about Vivi after hearing about what happened at the Reverie, and thought that Sabo would be perfectly fine. I guess one way the crew could be incentivized to go would be if the God's Knights did manage to kidnap one of the Giant's kids, but that once again does not seem feasible, where the kids would have to be transported with a ship, which would take literally weeks to reach Mariejois. And not to sound like a broken clock, the place is on fire right now. And yeah, there's also the previous point about Elbaf's own storylines like Harald and the Heaven World still not being finished. So, while the Straw Hats going to the Holy Land would be cool, I don't honestly see it happening. After all, they still have the far more important plotline of having to fight Big Mom on Elbaf later in this arc. I don't really know what else to say about this chapter, except that Qilingam is actually a super polite and understanding person. He also joins Perospero as one of the rare archers of One Piece, but that still isn't enough for me to forgive him for all the anxiety he's given me for having to pronounce his weird as heck name aloud in recordings. Oh yeah, also, who on earth is Kaido Junior, and what is he doing with the kids? He looks to have horns, which indicates that he has ancient giant blood. My guess is that this might be our first hint at the giants who live in Heaven World, where they should have also heard Summer's broadcast and might have come down to investigate. I'm just really hoping we'll meet some really powerful giants other than Loki soon, because it's getting harder and harder to accept that the world government is going through hell and high water just to recruit a bunch of Vice Admiral tier fighters on their side. Thank you to all my members. I'll be sure to take full advantage of your plunder, but if you aren't a member and also want to get your wallet looted, you can click the join button. Really appreciate everyone who watched this video to the end.